Hi, I'm Phil O'Connor, the Live Enterprise Director here at the Oklahoman. This is Week in Review, where we catch some of the headlines from the previous week and talk about some of the stories that we have coming up in the next few days. We've had a great, interesting week here at the Oklahoman, had a lot of good stories. We had an unusually culturally complicated story out of Norman this week where the FBI raided a bed and breakfast looking for evidence after a woman accused the owners of the property of holding her as an indentured servant, essentially. Horrible story if it's true, in terms of asking her even to give up a child that she was born, that she had at the home. Brianna, this could be a tough tale to untangle. The owners of the inn, of course, dispute the woman's claims.
Yes, I went to the Whispering Pines Inn this week in Norman, and I spoke to the owners. It's a family-run business. And they say that they treated the woman like a member of their family. They treated her very well. They sponsored her immigration to the United States as a favor to a family friend, they say. And they say the allegations arose from after one of their employees left Whispering Pines kind of on bad terms, and she reported the matter to the FBI. And from there, their business has been raided by the FBI. The woman is now in FBI custody, and the FBI tells me that they're still under investigation. The family says this has really hurt their business. They have people canceling reservations. When I went and visited the business on Wednesday afternoon, one customer called to cancel their wedding, and they're saying that they've been falsely accused.
So this issue with the baby, talk a little bit about that. What was the issue there? The allegation initially was that they had forced her to give up the child, right?
According to the search warrant application that was filed in federal court by the FBI, there was an allegation made that this woman was forced to give up a daughter that she gave birth to while in the United States, that this family that sponsored her immigration had forced her to give up the child. And when I spoke with the family, the Chow family, they told me that unbeknownst to them, the woman was already pregnant when she came to the United States, and after she had been staying with them for a while, it became very apparent that she was pregnant. And they said it was her decision to give up the child. They said that they took her to appointments, bought her maternity clothes, took very good care of her while she was pregnant, and they said it was her decision.
So what's the next step? What do we expect to hear next? Where does it go from here?
I'm going to keep following this story and checking up on the investigation. The family tells me that they expect to be cleared of all of these accusations. No criminal charges have been filed yet, and I'm just going to keep checking back.
Okay, and then the unusual nature of covering these kinds of stories. These are often emotional stories. Talk a little bit about just your initial encounter with the family when you went to go talk to them about the allegations.
So I went to their business. It's on Wednesday afternoon. It's a bed and breakfast set on about 20 acres in a rural part of Norman, kind of close to Lake Thunderbird off Highway 9.
And they're an immigrant family, right?
Yes, they immigrated to the United States. They from Cambodia in the 1980s. They were political refugees, and they say that they've worked really hard to build their own business over the years. It's kind of the American dream to do that. And yeah, they were very upset with the way the media has handled this story. They said that a lot of the local TV stations came to their business, and they weren't happy with how it was covered.
It's an emotional story, no doubt. I'm sure that we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the weeks to come. Thanks, Brianna. I really appreciate it. It's also been a tough few days for the school board, Tim. So we have questions about Interim Superintendent Aurora Laura and whether she holds the proper certifications for the job that she's held. And then in our front page story today, we talk about board chairwoman Lynn Harden's. There's a group of people that she's no longer apparently interested in hearing from at these meetings, and that's the public, which sort of, given that it's a public meeting, is an interesting take. Tell me a little bit about what's going on there, and I also understand they're trying to talk about cutting off board members' comments even in the meetings. What's driving this?
That's correct. There's been a lot of contention at board meetings in recent weeks from board members themselves directing, abrasive comments towards members of the community, including the teachers union president. There's been a lot of contention over this charter school issue. This KIP issue, they want to expand in the northeast part of the city, and there are some folks that may not have all the information. They're saying that they were lied to and weren't told about this issue in a timely manner, given all the facts. And so a lot of that has led, there's been a lot of calling down. Lynn has called down people. In fact, she told one lady last week that she couldn't come up and speak from the podium because she was going to talk about her religious leanings again, and she's been a regular participant at the microphone. And I guess it all kind of came to a head last week when a board member, Bob Hammock, took about 10 minutes during board member comment to kind of lambast Ed Allen, the teachers union president, who has been very critical of the board, and he was very critical of former Superintendent Rob New and his policies, especially regarding discipline and student code of conduct. And I talked to Lynn yesterday, and she just said, look, she wants to talk about, things that add to the meeting. And I don't think she's not advocating for, she may want to eliminate public comment. Now, public comment is not even about a third of the 500 school districts in Oklahoma do not have public comment. So they have other ways of engaging the community. One is, and this was an idea that is being floated by a couple of board members. And again, they're going to talk about this, but Lynn, as the board chair, does have the authority to say, hey, look, I don't want to have public comment. The board seems to be falling in line with her right now, even though they may not necessarily agree with it, but they're supporting her. But she does want to meet with other members of the board and talk about this. And one board member in particular, Paula Lewis, said, look, we can make them part of the agenda. If they're part of the agenda, which means they'd have to sign up ahead of time and not necessarily like a half an hour before the meeting, but they'd have to be part of the agenda, they can have a discussion with the board, and there can be a conversation. Where right now it's just the board the public talks to the board is not allowed to respond, but then the board has their own comment session, and then they get to say whatever they said. Well, Lynn is catching a lot of grief for the way she handled the situation with Bob, because Bob went on, the public gets to speak for 3 minutes, and Bob during the board member comment session went on for like almost 11 minutes. And basically, he said that Ed Allen is washed up and he's irrelevant, and teachers' unions don't matter anymore. And he basically said he's never happy, and he looks like he's got a lemon in his mouth when he comes to the podium. And he just basically stood up there and ripped the guy, and Lynn didn't make any effort to stop him. And at some point, she says, "Okay, wrap it up." But a lot of the folks I talked to were not happy about the fact that she just let him go on for a minute when it appeared to be basically a personal attack. And there are, there's a code of ethics, and it basically says, to keep it, civil and whatnot. And but the district said he didn't violate any of those edicts, and he was just speaking his mind. He ought to be able to speak his mind. And Lynn said she didn't reprimand him, but she thinks there needs to be some discussion about this. One of the things I'm hearing is that they're thinking about suspending public comment and board comment as early as the next meeting, which is June 27th. That's a big meeting for the board because they've got to approve a bunch of contracts before the fiscal year begins July 1st. They're also expected to promote Aurora Laura as superintendent. And I'm hearing that they're also going to take a vote potentially on this KIP charter thing, and now they're saying they may not want to have anybody come and speak to the board.
Where will the public get to weigh in? I mean, if you're at a meeting and the board is scheduled to vote that night on a controversial issue, I understand that that's on the board, and there may be during the course of the meeting, if the board is set to vote on something, is there an opportunity for the public to comment at some point in the meeting?
Well, it sounds like, yeah, as far as this next meeting, that's a good question. I mean, if they suspend,
or even if they well, even currently, how does it work? If you're at the board meeting now, there's a public portion of the meeting at the beginning, I'm guessing, where they set aside time for public comment, where you can just basically sign up and say, I want to talk, whatever. During the course of the meeting, as they vote on issues, is the floor open to the public to comment on
No, it's not.
Okay, so my question then would be, where does the public ever have an opportunity to comment publicly about how they stand on a particular issue that the board may vote on?
Yeah, typically, and Ben, maybe you can help me out with this, I think it usually comes down to you get to talk about it at the next meeting. Or you might, you can come up and address something on it. There are certain things you can't talk about when you come to the podium. Certain things you can't talk about, but you can talk about pretty much whatever you want. But as far as a vote, you can talk about that particular vote and how you feel about it, but there's not going to be any comment when they actually vote on the item, unless, like this one board member is suggesting, that you sign up to be a part of the agenda discussion, and then you can just have a conversation with somebody. And I could be.
No, you're right. I mean, I think, Tim, you and I were talking this morning about, we've covered a lot of Oklahoma City Public School Board meetings, and there's been times where we've been almost the only people in the crowd. And we've heard board members say, publicly, like, we wish, the community got more involved.
The public would take an interest in the education, but we don't want to actually hear from the public. We just want them to come
that's what it looks like maybe now.
But
the last few months, we've seen, standing room only crowds, and a lot of that has to do with general anxiety around budget cuts, but also the charter school proposals, expansion proposals, things concerning the former superintendent. So there's been a lot of issues that have drawn out the public. And the thing that I've also seen too is that public comment serves as a chance for not just parents to express their opinion publicly, but it's kind of an empowering experience for people. And I think we've often talked with people after they've spoken to the board out in the lobby, and for them this was a chance for them to really take a vested interest in their child's education or the education of their community. And so with a lot of controversy going on right now, the timing seems like it might be a little complicated to say we don't want to really hear from the public when there's really a lot of issues right now the public is wanting to speak up on.
Absolutely, and be able to judge the temperature of the community by hearing what the comments are. I mean, why would you shut off, and I understand this discussion about, well, the good district or other districts have figured out a better way to deal with communication, and whether that's newsletters or whatever. Well, great, that's communication out, but how does the communication back come in? And sometimes, in a lot of instances, the only way parents can get, and I concede, school board politics are the most brutal, hand-fought, because you're dealing with people's children, their most precious asset. But the idea that that you're going to tell them that there's no opportunity for you to come in. A lot of times when people are frustrated, it is by taking it to a public forum that draws attention to their issue. So I just kind of wonder about the viability of doing something like that, and especially in a situation like the Oklahoma City School District, which is so in need of having the involvement of the parents.
Yeah, and it's important to take a look at what other districts are doing across the state, but at the same time, Oklahoma City is a unique animal. I mean, this is the largest district in the state of Oklahoma. You really only have one other district, Tulsa, that kind of compares when you look at the number of children, the number of schools, the high poverty, the diversity. I mean, this is not like a small town, rural district in the middle of Oklahoma where, a parent maybe will see their school board member at work or at the diner.
And that's what I'm curious about. What are the 1/3 that don't do that? I'm curious about who those are.
I spoke
are
with
they small districts, rural districts? Are they,
I spoke with the general counsel for the Oklahoma State School Boards Association, and she basically said the schools that don't have public comment, they either have community forums or they correspond. Typically, if you have a concern you share with a board member in the Oklahoma City District, the superintendent is supposed to correspond with that particular board member to see that their issue gets resolved. And it sounds like maybe that hasn't been happening. I don't know to what degree that folks who speak are getting their concerns addressed. But that's the other issue. What this lady told me was that some of these school districts have pretty good communication and that pretty good correspondence, and so a lot of these folks are getting their issues addressed. And like Ben said, maybe they have different relationships where they see these people, but it was basically her contention that folks who get their needs met through correspondence and stuff are not necessarily fired up to come to the board and express their concerns. But you have a lot of people in this district, a lot of parents and a lot of community supporters who, they're pissed off because they feel like there's a lot of dissension. They feel like they're not getting their questions answered. They're being deceived. They have a lot of concerns, and this doesn't help any. Although Lynn's point was, and it sounds like she's got some solutions she wants to discuss with the board. But her concern was, if it's not adding to the meeting, we can't spend this time squabbling over stuff that's not adding to the meeting. And I think she's speaking directly to, a lot of the outbursts and maybe personal attacks and the other kind of stuff. This back and forth at meetings.
Sure.
Anyway,
sure.
so
I mean, it's also important for the public to show respect as well.
Well, that too.
Act properly when they have the opportunity to speak. Quickly, Aurora
Sure.
Laura and her certification issue.
Yeah, well, the district acknowledged this week that that she is required by state statute to have a superintendent certification, even as an associate superintendent, which she's held that job for 2 years, and she's now the acting superintendent. She wants to be the superintendent. She probably will be the superintendent. She's taken the exam, but what the district came out and said, hey, look, we did not, it was an oversight. She didn't get that certification, but they also kind of threw the State Department of Education under the bus too, and kind of threw some blame their way for their oversight. I talked to somebody at the State Department, and they said, hey, look, the first year, we missed it. The second year, we didn't miss it, and it looks like they've docked, for the time being, they've docked the district as far as their accreditation. A
check mark, essentially, a list
sure.
of things that the district needs to do to be properly and fully accredited. That's
exactly.
a ding against it.
Exactly. Until she gets the results of that test. I'm told the results of that test could come back as early as today. Might be a few more days, and then they'd remove that mark. I did talk to Aurora briefly over the phone, and it sounds like she thought she had the required certification from what she told me, and she did everything she thought she was supposed to do. So. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Educators also in the news. June 28th, voters are going to go to the polls. State primary elections. One group is making a big contested push to make it into office this year, and that's educators.
Yeah, an election year. If you remember back in April, the filing period, there was a lot of news given to the fact that we saw a lot of educators, teachers, or people connected to public schools file for office. Our best count is somewhere over 40. Of these candidates. The banner of Teachers Caucus has been used to kind of talk about this group. And what's interesting, this is not just one political party. There are Democrats, Republicans, Independents. There's no central banner, but it's just this group of educators that are running for office on the platform of increasing education funding and increasing teacher salaries, which rank near dead last in the United States. So what we're going to see on the June 28th primary is really the first test of those candidates. 28, based on my best count, 28 educators or educator candidates are facing a contested primary on June 28th. And when I say educators, once again, that includes some public school teachers, some former teachers, former superintendents, spouses of teachers, but that are really running on this education platform. Now, if you talk to some incumbents who are facing a challenge, they're quick to point out that, hey, they're for education too. They wish they could increase education funding and teacher salaries, but the budget is what it is, and a lot of these challengers are saying, well, that's not acceptable. We want to come in and make some tough decisions to increase education funding. But on June 28th, we're going to get our real first test of what some of these candidates are capable of doing, and once again, they're in different parties.
I was going to say, what's the breakdown? Do we know?
Well, what's interesting about it is the majority of these candidates appear to be Democratic, not by a landslide, but there are more Democrats than there are Republicans. We actually, working with the Sooner Poll, a polling firm here in Oklahoma, they actually took the name of Oklahomans with a teacher certificate. So teachers, people who are teaching now or have recently taught, and ran it through the voter database. And what they found is there's about 57,000 teachers or recent teachers that are voting in the state, and the majority of them, by a few percentage points, are Republican. It's a little bit higher than the state average. And so most teachers tend to lean Republican, so that'll be interesting. A lot of these primary races are in the Democratic side of things.
Is that because they're mostly urban candidates? Or do we know?
Well,
I mean,
there's different.
Do the Democrats tend to be located in urban districts?
Well, some of that, although you're seeing them really spread out. I mean, there are a lot of those candidates in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And because I think part of it too is that there's this kind of pushback on the policies of the legislature. The legislature is dominated by Republicans, so I think it's just natural that you're going to see some Democrats come out and say, and see that they can speak freely to say, hey, the legislature is failing us in these areas. Another thing that we saw is that when you look at voter history, teachers have a higher likelihood of voting than just the average Oklahoma voter, and so by that data, they can be a force in the elections, in the primary and especially in the general. But once again, all these races are unique. A lot of these candidates are first-time candidates, and it's really hard to get elected as a first-time candidate. It's hard to raise money, it's hard to get that name recognition, especially when you're running against an incumbent. And we've said it before, but in the last 2 election cycles, there's been 30 incumbents who have faced a primary challenge. Only 1 has lost in that primary. So it's really difficult to knock off an incumbent, but we are seeing a record number of incumbents this year facing a primary challenge. So there probably will be a few upsets just by the numbers.
Great. And that's the kind of stories that you can read this weekend. Ben's got all the details on those races. Be sure to pick up your Sunday Oklahoman so you can read that. Brianna, Ben, Tim, thanks for being here. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for joining us.